And then if there are any questions, we will try to address it at the, after each topic, we'll try to answer any questions, but in general, if there are any more process questions, we'll try to take it as they come through. But this will be focusing on, because now that you're all experienced in SAP, I don't have to show you how to create an order, how to create a purchase order, how to create an invoice and things like that. At least, I can straight away go into what are the changes in HANA compared to R3 for a particular area, like if you're talking about sourcing, right? Converting a purchase requisition to a per PO. So what are the change? How did we do that process in R3, and how are we going to do that in HANA? If you are doing RFPs, quotations, those things. How did we do that in R3, and now how are we doing that in HANA? So these are some of the areas that will be focusing more on the delta aspects of the changes in HANA that forced us to learn all these new things happening around us, and that's how we'll start. So as laid out here, I'll be focusing more on the introduction to why there is a change for SAP. Earlier we've had instances where SAP has migrated. I don't know where you all started. I started in SAP when it was 4.6b, right? So before me it was there are a few other versions. I know a few of my friends who have started from 3.1h as well, but the core logic of SAP did not change from 4.6 to HANA. There have been several upgrades. We've been moved from 4.6b to 4.6c, then to 4.7, then to 5, then to 6, and within 6 there are much more EHP4, EHP7. There are many upgrades that happened over a period of time, but never we were more focused or wanted to learn more, wanted to take a course to learn more in all these several years. But why we have to learn about all this with HANA? So these are the areas that we'll talk about in the introduction of why, what is so special about HANA, and why that we have to learn HANA. And then there's something called Fiori that comes with HANA. We'll talk about Fiori. What does it offer, and what do we have to do that? And then there are some changes that we'll talk about why part, and then we'll go in detail about what are the changes, some of the changes in master data, like master, middle master, customer master. There are a few changes there, and then there are some changes in how you perform your transactions in your sales orders. What does it change when it comes to Fiori from sales perspective, and then what are the changes in pricing? How was the pricing calculated, or how was the pricing logic working in R3, and how would that work, and what are the changes in HANA? And similarly, there are some changes to the output management, which I did not list it here, but I'll talk through when the appropriate time comes. What are the changes in the output? There is a big change in how we were sending the documents in ECC, traditional R3, versus how we're going to send the documents in HANA. So we'll talk about the output management, and there is quite a bit of differences in the ATP, credit management, rebates, and sourcing, foreign trade and GTS, etc. And then MRP, of course, there's a big change in MRPs. So yeah, we'll be focusing more on the delta aspects of what is changing, and we can talk about in detail, as you have any questions that may come up during that process. Any questions so far?
And will we have access to the S4HANA system for practice?
I think you will. I'll leave it to Naveen to answer that, but I think you will have it.
Yes, you will be having it.
Okay.
Okay. So now let's go into the. So these are some of more details into what we're going to cover in each one of those areas. But I've given you a very high-level overview of what we're going to cover. So now let's go ahead and start introduction. So let me, before I go into the introduction, so let me understand what is that you all know about HANA. Maybe you can start with Krishna. You can tell me what is that you know about HANA so far, at least.
Yeah, so I read kind of different documentation, online documentation. So definitely it's kind of very productive. I can say as per the speed is concerned, is definitely kind of maybe 100 times, whatever, 30 times more as per the speed, and as per the, and even the storage of data, row wise, column wise, there is a difference. And also as per the data, to pull the data, there is compared to previous versions now, it's kind of in memory database, I think. So because of that, we can retrieve the data very in high speeds,
Hello.
and we can have parallel processing, I think.
Yeah, someone trying to talk. Is it Sam? Okay, so go ahead, Krishna. Sorry, I heard somebody saying hello, so I wanted.
It's okay, no problem. So that's what definitely, as per the processes are concerned, it is now much changes. But as per the tables and the Fiori, these are the new things that we need to learn. That's what I think.
Okay, so that's good. So you have some idea about what you have some idea about why HANA, and that's the reason why you probably wanted to learn more, and then you joined this course. Okay, so I think some of your concerns, some of your things are valid, and we'll talk more in detail about the other things. So you probably went through some online documentation about, so that's good. At least having some idea is good. So coming back to Sam, so what do you know about HANA? I know you are from a HCM background, so not sure if you have much knowledge. I'm not sure how much you know about the different process in logistics, like sales, purchasing, or production planning. But let me know what is that you know about HANA so far, or are you trying to get more information through this course? Sam, do we have you?
Briefly, I got lost. I don't know what you're asking me.
Okay. No, I was trying to know about what do you know about HANA so far, and then probably we'll take it from there in the courses.
HANA is the new product from SAP, where they want to go everything with the subscription based rather than the on-premise, and so it's going to be the old ECC will be supported until only 2025 or something, and so they are moving with completely to S4HANA, and I believe the configuration, those things will 90% be typically what they have in ECC, but there'll be some deltas which they're talking about these business partners and the consolidated list or something that comes as releases for each and every module to have this in the what do you call that, in the cloud-based computing. That's what I know, but I don't know much about it.
Okay, so that's good. At least you have some information. Now coming back to Prasanna, so what do you know about HANA so far?
Yeah, 3D. Yeah, actually, I'm having the same understanding what others is having. So this is a new application developed by SAP. So, and coming to GTS, actually, I'm from GTS background. So what I heard is S4HANA is having the integrated GTS part, like foreign trade is discontinuing, and they are introduced the international trade with the same functionalities what GTS is having.
Okay, so that's good. So I think in general, whatever knowledge that you're having so far is fairly knowledge. I mean, it's more or less accurate, but you're all having sporadic information about I mean, you all know that because SAP is changing now, we are wanting to know about now. Now let us, through this course of the time, through the introduction of HANA, so let's try to understand why SAP had to come to HANA. Why R3, R3 was doing well so far. Clients are happy, they are running their business. Products are being made, products are being shipped, products are being procured. Everybody is happy. And all of a sudden, why SAP has to come to terms of something called HANA, and then say, hey, by this time of the years, so everybody have to migrate to HANA. So why there is a sudden shift in the change? So let's try to understand to the core. Let's try to understand the core and see why we have to do this, right? So now why S4HANA? If you see, forget about SAP for a second here. If you see globally, for the last maybe 4 or 5 years, so there is a huge shift in terms of the usage of the data, right? Ever since Facebook came in, probably about last, I would say maybe from 2009 onwards, when there is an introduction of smartphones, the way we lived is changed. So the way we operate things have changed. The way we want things have changed. Everything has moved away from your desktop environment to mobile environment. Before 2008, before the consumption of your mobile phones, everything was more or less, even though we had internet changed a lot of things, but after the introduction of the internet, there's a lot of things that have changed. So everything is mobile now. We buy stuff through mobile, we bank through mobile, we chat through mobile. We have all our different apps on the phones. We communicate through mobile phones. Everything is mobile. So there is so much of digitalized environment today, which was not the case probably 7, 8, 10 years ago. Before the start of 2009, not many people who were having smartphones, but from 2009, every year on year, the number of smartphone consumption has been increasing year on year. Nowadays you can see that everybody is more or less kind of, at least in US, I'm guessing the same case with elsewhere as well, that you're kind of forced to use a smartphone. I am not able to find a single person here at least who is using those analog phones back then. So because of this so much of data everywhere, anything that we want, right? If I don't know anything, what do? Immediately you go to your smartphone, go to Google and search information about it. And then so there's so much of information that's transformed digitally. This exponential growth of the digital information, social media, you go into your phones, to Facebook, WhatsApp, you're collecting, the companies are collecting more and more data. Because of that data, they're trying to analyze the patterns, the behavioral patterns of the consumers. That's why things like big data, data science are more predominant these days, which were not the case earlier. So these kind of things are forcing companies to be more and more smarter. Right? For example, if you try to search something on the internet, the next minute you open, let's say you wanted to go to a vacation to Europe, and you search about top vacation spots on your Google Chrome browser. The next minute you open your Facebook, how many of you have seen your ads on your Facebook related to the search that you made in Google Chrome, right? It's very obvious, right? Have you seen that happen?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is because companies are trying to collect your data, and they're trying to do some analysis based on your data. So they're trying to understand your data and then trying to project information. So the way the advertisement media have changed. Earlier, if you wanted to know about something, you specifically have to go to these visitor centers, get some information. Now that's not the case. People are trying to push you through this mobile interfaces. So the communication medium has changed now because of this vast global change. Now companies have to become more and more smarter. That's where a lot of collection of data has to be required. When we have to collect a lot more data, so the companies have to be, the equipment that we use, the softwares or the hardwares that we use are supposed to be capable of storing more and more data. So we store data, we process the data, and we present the data. So earlier, this much of additional information was not required. We used to have some sporadic information here and there, but not to the volumes of this much. So this exponential growth of this digital information has actually transformed the way the businesses are done. So because of the way that there is a shift in the businesses are done, the business softwares that support these business systems also had to change. And I mean, not just SAP, if you see Oracle or even websites also, there is a lot of shift in the way how you operate. If you have worked on any of your .com websites or anything like that, there is a big shift in the logic of how the data is being processed, because it's all speed now, instant answers, right? Amazon has actually changed the way the shopping has occurred. Earlier, if you want something, you have to go to a store and buy something. Now Amazon, with all instant information, you look for a product, you buy it, and within the next 4 or 5 years, next 4 or 5 hours, or maybe the next day, the product is at your door. That's the speed. In olden days, or not in olden days, probably I would say 10 years back, if such communication has to occur, first the calling application has to receive your data, they have to store it, and then they used to send it to the other system overnight, and then they process that information, they ship the product, and then they send this overnight. So information used to transfer between one company to the other company overnight, so which is called as a data file transfers. I don't know how many of you have worked with these data file transfers, but probably 10 years ago, there's more of a data file. So we used to collect the information in flat files. We used to push the information to the other system through the files, and they used to take that and process that. It all is a lot of time consuming. Now with mobile data, right, users are not that patient to wait for such a long time. And because of so much of competition around, so you're kind of forcing the companies also to be even more smarter, even more faster. So the shift in this business paradigm have actually caused the software companies that make also to change the way they operate. They also have to be fast. They also have to be aggressive. They also have to have the architecture or have the hardwares that kind of support this kind of business transformation. So that's one of the reasons why SAP had to come up with something called HANA, and then which is actually helping the clients to run their business more effectively, more efficiently, and more faster way than they did before. Right? Any questions? So which is this kind of explains what we were talking about. So exponential growth of the digital information, more use of cloud technologies these days. Everything is cloud. The data that you store on your hard drives. I don't think you probably storing any of your data on your laptop hard drives. Everything you try to store in OneDrives or Google Drives. In smartphones, you store every one of your photos in iCloud, which is again a cloud-based. So this kind of cloud storage also have changed the ideas of how we have to how the companies have to use their operating systems or use their hardwares. Globalization, Internet of Things, more speed in normal business process, and the communication has to be fast and effective. And these are the things that have actually caused the companies the change in the businesses. This is the general change in the trend in the business, and that change in the trend in the business is what caused companies to adapt to that change, and that's why HANA is introduced. And if you see that when I started using computers for the first time, we all used to have floppy disk drives, 1.4 KB floppy disk drives. That's where we used to store the data. And then slowly thumb drives, hard drives came in, and then thumb drives came in. Now that's all Google Drive. So there is the hardware, the technology companies have providing more and more. Now earlier memory sticks used to be probably 1 GB, 500 MB, 1 GB memory sticks. Now you have 64 GB memory disks. Earlier 64 GB hard disks used to be there. Now you have just 64 GB memory, 128 GB. I think I saw up to 128. I don't know if 256 is still there or not, but 128 GB of data can be stored in a small drive. There's powerful multi-core processors, and these kind of changes in the technology kind of forcing these companies also to be able to, I mean, not forcing, but kind of helping the companies to be able to expand their hard drives. And then with the expansion of their hard drives, now your hardware is ready to run. So when it is ready to run, you just have to give them enough fuel to make sure that you are using a proper technology. So SAP HANA is such a mechanism where after using your powerful hardwares, we are kind of, it's not good. I mean, having a good powerful car is not just enough, right? You need to be equally good. The driver has to be equally good to make use of the full power that's in the car, correct? So similarly, not having a very good hardware is just not enough for a system to be super fast. The logic that we use, the processes that we use, the applications that we run on these hardwares also have to be equally good to be able to make sure that your entire system is running effectively and quickly, like it should, or like it's designed for, right? So that's one of the reasons why SAP had to rewrite majority of their core logic inside to make sure that the applications are defined or designed to run on these powerful hardwares to be able to provide effective results to the end users, right?
I have a question, Srini.
Mm-hmm.
So comparing S4 HANA with Google Drive and Amazon Drive, so there we have only subscription-based services, right? So if you want Google Drive, you subscribe to it, right? And so S4 HANA is also subscription-based, where you get a slot in a giant server.
We'll talk about that when we come into the implementation models. Yes.
Okay.
It is not fully. I mean, you can have both on-premise and cloud subscriptions. So yes and no to it. So we'll talk more in details about that when we probably in the next maybe another 10 slides, if not today, maybe tomorrow. I'll talk about more when we talk about the different implementations. So when we go for a cloud-based, so what are the things that we have? And we go for on-premise, what are the things that we have on core, and then we can compare. Yes, but any cloud in general is simple. The rule is simple. Any cloud is subscription-based.
Okay, thank you.
So whether it is Google Drive, OneDrive, anything is subscription. But how do we subscribe to it? Probably changes. I mean, SAP Cloud is not as SAP. I mean, Google is more consumer-based. It's per individual, but SAP Cloud is little different to that. But functions on the same way.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Now, as I said, why SAP HANA? We all know that, since you all been in SAP, we all know that it all started in 1979 with R2, and then graduated to R3 in 92, and then we graduated with changes in the NetWeaver, and also because of the internet scheme of things and development of the NetWeaver platform. The R3 has eventually changed to what we call as ERP, resource planning, enterprise resource planning, which changed into 2004. And then we have had different versions from 2004. We've had upgrades, ERP 4, 5, ECC. That's where ERP is called ECC, ECC 5, ECC 6, and within ECC 6 we have different upgrades. And now from 2015 we've had something called S4HANA. So the big difference between the earlier versions and 2015 HANA is that up until HANA, SAP had given the consumers choices to pick and choose their own databases, right? From HANA, with HANA, the consumer or the clients do not have any choice to pick their own databases. So it got to be a HANA database, before that, you could have your Oracle data, you could have your SAP running on Oracle, you could have your SAP running on a Linux, on a different databases. But now with HANA, you got to have a HANA database. So that's one of the big change that comes through from the client's perspective. They can't pick and choose the databases now. It got to be HANA, right? So now what's comes with S4HANA suite, right? So again, S4HANA is just not a single product. It's like what we used to call as ECC is now called as enterprise management. S4HANA enterprise management. It's not a single product. It is a suite that covers many applications. We can the clients that pick, they can start with some basic components. They can just start with their enterprise management, and then they can add on additional things as their business demands. They can add Ariba, which is kind of, I don't know if you're aware of Ariba. Ariba is kind of a tool that will help them to go to the vendors, to communicate with vendors effectively. And if they want to go to Hybris, they can add on. The add-ons were easy. You can ask me a question here that even in ECC we had these add-ons. So what's so special in HANA, right? In ECC also we had SRM, CRM, these kind of different add-ons. HCM, these kind of different add-ons on top of ECC. So what's the difference between back then and back now? So the big difference being, because of the ability that SAP gave in ECC for the vendors to pick and choose different databases, the master data had to be duplicated in each environment. For example, if SAP CRM was added on top of ECC, right? You got to have your customers in ECC, and you also got to have your customers in CRM. So every time you make a change to any customer, you got to have an interface that communicates back and forth. So if you have APO as an add-on, right? Any metal master that's created in SAP, you got to communicate back to APO. Similarly, if you add SRM, any vendor that you created, you got to communicate with your vendor. So any master data elements like your customer master, metal master, vendor master, they all had to be duplicated in respective environments. So because each were running, each had the capability to run on their own databases. So the database is not unique, and because that's the reason why the records are not shared across the different applications. And now with HANA, because it's a single HANA database, if you choose to add on more components, you don't have to duplicate your data. You just create one source of master record, and that source of master record is actually shared by the other components. So that's the big change that comes with integrating additional components in HANA versus integrating additional components in ECC.
So in the example of WM, right, where we do the shift process to move material master from ECC to EWM, those kind of things also will be redundant in S4HANA environment, right? So it is going to be in same database where EWM will be within S4HANA database. So there is no shipping or any code interface running between back and forth.
Your voice is breaking. I'm not able to hear you. I'm only hearing every other word.
Oh, so what I'm saying is, say, for example, the EWM, right? When we do any processing EWM, there is a communication that runs back and forth between ECC and EWM, which they call as code interface, CIF, right? So the materials and the customer master, plant, every information is transferred from this system to that system for each and every transaction. So in this case of S4HANA, you won't have that because everybody is hosted within the HANA environment. Is it?
Yes. Yes. So I mean, you don't have to have that. So EWM becomes the component within HANA enterprise management itself.
Okay, so there's a lot of discrepancies that happens when you have system distributed across different clients. So now it's on one system, there will be no discrepancy in the say data count or material count. Or okay, got it.
Yes. Yes, that's the idea, right? So these are practically, because EWM was, as I said before, EWM is a add-on component to ECC. It's not part of the ECC environment. So it's an added component. So because of that added component, you got to communicate back and forth between those two. So now EWM is within enterprise management. So a lot of those additional unwanted communications are reduced. Not just with EWM, it's same case with CRM, SRM as well. So a lot of those additional communications can be reduced.
Okay, got it.
Okay. But if you are using, for example, I've seen some clients use these add-on components on top of, like, if you are using Hybris to SAP ECC, just like EWM, you still have to establish those communications, like to transfer your data. But if you are using HANA with Hybris, HANA with Ariba, then you don't have to use that. It's a single record that's shared between those two. So it's because on the back end, it's the same database, whether only the difference being the calling application varies. If Ariba is calling, is the same database. ECC, enterprise management, is calling the same database back again in the back end.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Okay. So now, what are the as we discussed, the native capabilities of HANA? Is it offers the user experience, what we call as Fiori, right? Fiori is a new user experience that's delivered to the clients that is supposed to improve the productivity and also the satisfaction of users. So sometimes if you it'll also help you, I mean, when I say satisfaction, it'll help you to make sure that 4 clicks are actually done in one click. If you're opening a purchase order, or if you're opening, I mean, the way ECC is designed is it's kind of designed one transaction for all your purposes. So for example, if there is a sales order, right? Now you could create an order for multiple reasons, or multiple other application, or multiple other purposes. Or if you can create when you're creating a purchase order, you could create a third-party PO, you could create a free of charge PO, you could create a service PO, and different things like that. But not every field on the purchase order is actually required for that particular process, right? For example, if you're creating a PO, service free of charge PO, normally for creating a free of charge PO or a return free of charge PO, you have to mark it as a free of charge, and that mark on the free of charge is at the far right of the screen, right? At the far right of the screen. I mean, I don't know if everybody is aware of this, but in general, it's on the far end. So it's the same screen, but either the order type is different of how you use the transaction, or some things are different. But with HANA, what it gives you is the amount of time that it takes in ECC is still the same, and also the users have to be a little more patient enough and intelligent enough. But with user experience, it will understand what are the minimum or basic information that required to process a particular transaction, and we design an app or we design an application. It's completely user friendly and user defined application that you can only provide information about what's required for that, and then only that particular information is required, and which will help you to not worry about a lot of other stuff. So if you're an intelligent user, analysts or super users, they are not, most of the time they don't have a problem because they know how to use a particular transaction. But if you're talking about an end user, sometimes the training becomes difficult because they may use some of the fields that are not defined for that process. That's when we run into issues. So those kind of things are eliminated through something called Fiori, which is designed to develop or build the user experience and user satisfaction. And so we'll talk about the Fiori in more detail. This is just giving you the capabilities or aspects of HANA here. And then coming to Sam's question, I think SAP HANA can be deployed in 3 ways. It could be deployed on premise, and it could be deployed in cloud, or it could be deployed as a combination of both. You can pick and choose to have some components as on premise and some components as on cloud. When you talk about on premise, it's nothing but your traditional, everything, the hardwares, everything are installed on location. But cloud is where, again, it comes to a subscription model per user based. The hardwares, the hardware is actually hosted somewhere else, and we just log in with our usernames, and it's more like we log in and we start using those transactions. With cloud, there are few disadvantages that what are we'll talk about more in detail about the advantages and disadvantages of the cloud versus on-premise. But in general, cloud is more subscription based, like per user. And then on-premise is where everything is it's fully customizable, fully just like how you have your ECC today. And the data model has been simplified massively. The footprint has been reduced a lot. When I say footprint, we talk about this terminology called footprint quite a lot in HANA. Now, footprint is basically the number of times a particular database table is hit, right? For example, if you're wanting to know some information about Material Master, right? No matter what, you still have to hit multiple tables to collect that information, because in Material Master, the whole Material Master information that you see on the Material Master record is actually stored in multiple databases. So some of these databases are redundant and some of the databases are efficient. So SAP has done a far more analysis and tried to reduce all those redundant databases and try to, for example, sometimes you may see that table A has 15 columns, table C has 10 columns. Table A has 15 columns and table B has 20 columns, and 10 columns that are common between A and B, right? Only there are a few columns that are different. So what SAP tried to do is, when it identified that, 10 columns are common between A and B. Now, why don't I add these 3 columns to A and make it a single database instead of 2 databases? So that's what it tried to do with this footprint reduction. So you would see that, for example, the sales tables like VBAK. VBAK is basically a sales order header table that holds information about sales order headers, and VBUK is a sales order header table again, that holds information about statuses. 80% of this information is same, but just it has few additional columns of information about the status. So what SAP tried to do is, it added those status tables back to VBAK and then removed VBUK completely, removed the status header table completely. So there's no more data that's stored in that. So that way, every time an order is created, you don't have to go to VBUK to update it. So the footprint has been reduced on that. Similarly, VBUP, everywhere like that, wherever there is a possibility of such reduction, it has reduced the data. Thereby, the footprints have been reduced a lot. So the data model has been massively simplified. A lot of unnecessary tables and the data in those tables have been eliminated. So that will reduce to help to shrink the data, the footprints, and then which will effectively, end of the day, help to run the transaction faster way. If you are performing an order and if you have to update 20 tables, it probably takes 3 seconds. And if the same transaction, if you are running if you are updating in 10 tables, right? Point number 1, the number of footprints to each, number of calls to each database is reduced. Number 2, talk about the logic that is inbuilt in the core process to update all this database. Because every time, not every single record is updated, right? The system has to evaluate when to update and when not to update, right? So all these unwanted processing logic have been reduced, and unwanted data has been reduced. So this way, the whole process have to be rewritten in such a way that it will run faster way to give you a better output. Any questions so far? And then same things as we talked about, right? And one of the most important factor with HANA is that it has in-memory database. What is the difference between in-memory and traditional? So what happens is when you in R3 model, right? In R3 model, you have your presentation layer. If you can visualize your R3 model, right? You have your database layer, your presentation layer. I mean, you have your application layer and then your presentation layer. So when you process a transaction at the presentation layer, it will go to the application layer, and then application layer will call the database. So as long as you are in, it will collect that information and keep it in the application layer itself. And then every time you make a new transaction, it has to go back to the database again. So every time it goes back to the database again, it will the time that it takes to consume is a lot more bigger. So when the time consumes is a lot more bigger, the output takes longer time. But with in-memory, what happens is everything is stored in memory. A lot of key fields are made, so indexes are made such that you don't have to go to the database every single time. It's all lying in the memory, and it's like flash. It gives you the result instantly. That's the technology behind in-memories. And then we have, because as I told, because the database have to be redundant tables have to be removed, and then the corresponding processing logics have to be changed. So because of that, every application had to be rewritten to support this new data models. Sales had to be rewritten in such a way, purchasing had to be rewritten, MRP had to be rewritten. Of course, finance had to be completely rewritten. That's the way we originated. We'll talk about it maybe tomorrow, but the applications have to be re-engineered or rewritten to support this change in the database models. And of course, the Fiori, which is called UI technology, so that will that's a much benefit to the user for having a better user experience compared to ECC. So I think I'll stop here. Maybe we'll continue tomorrow. So I'll be taking a class every day for 1 hour from 10 to 11 my time in Eastern time. Any questions, anybody?
So do we have classes during weekend? How it works?
Not on weekends. When if everybody are interested, I can take in the morning on the weekends, but not in the evenings.
Okay, for now it is only weekday every 1 hour, correct?
Yes.
Okay, that should be okay.
So, Srini?
Yes.
One question that I have is, when all these tables are rearranged to consolidate into one big table, looks like, so the development objects and all the write-ups that they've written in ECC have to be rewritten, right? Most of it, because all of that will be referring to different table access, and each and everything is individually accessed, and now it's all going into one table. So then all the write-up objects will be rewritten, right?
Are you talking about the customized of objects or the standard standard objects?
Not the standard one, customized. Most of the times you see a lot of customization in every object.
So when you're ready to go, we'll talk about that. I have those things covered in the readiness check. So when we talk about the readiness check, so one of the first thing that we do is validate whether how much of it had to be rewritten. I mean, we validate the current code. There are some standard tools that SAP has given. So that standard tool understands, for example, if you are updating VBAK, right, and VBUK separately, the standard code understands that VBUK is not existing in the new code anymore. So it will, the readiness check will tell you how much of it can be automatically be corrected and how much have to be manually corrected.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So there is a readiness check tool. So I think probably, I think it's one of the slide, I think. Yeah, system readiness check. So when you're ready
Okay.
to do your HANA, I'll talk about this, you know, when we come across this. But your question is answered in this part here.
Okay. Yes. Got it. Okay. Thank you.
So readiness check is where we check for all such things, compatibilities, and then that's where we will come to know whether how much of it can be easily applicable. And sometimes, see, not necessary that, you know, whatever you have written in your old system is correct. Now, sometimes you written that maybe to accommodate the need and hour at that time. So sometimes, you know, if things have changed now, so that's the reason why SAP gives you a warning or anything like that, and then maybe time to consider to rewrite the whole logic there.
Okay. Thank you.
So usually we'll start about 10 o'clock, and then I'll stop until 10:55 or 10:56, and then I'll give you a couple of minutes to ask any questions.
10 Eastern time?
Yeah, 10 Eastern time. So which is about, I don't know, wherever. I don't know where Prasanna is in Hyderabad. Sam, I don't know where you are.
Yeah, in the central zone.
You are in the central zone. Okay, so 9 o'clock for you. So Prasanna, it will be probably be 7:30, 8:30 for you. 8:30 for you, right?
No, it'll be 9.
No, for Prasanna.
Yeah, today it started at 8:30.
Okay.
So
Yeah, I think it will
is
be
it possible to move little earlier, 8 o'clock like that IST timing?
9:30. 8 o'clock is 9:30. I am fine with it. I can actually start at 9 o'clock Eastern time if you are all okay.
I think better to have 9:30 to 10:30. I think even for India it's comfortable.
Yeah.
Okay, 9:30 to 10:30 Eastern time, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So tomorrow I'll start at 9:30 Eastern time then, maybe 8:30. So I think for Prasanna, for you probably for in the next 3 weeks, 2.5 weeks probably we're going to shift the time. Time zone is changed, so you'll probably be start much earlier than that. But we'll talk about then. But yeah, this course lasts about 30 to 35 sessions, 35 maybe thereabouts. And depending upon, sometimes if we were too involved in a topic and we take little more, you know, my goal is to tell you about the introduction of HANA, and then the changes in the sales, changes in the procurement, and changes in MRP areas, and then I can help you to do teach you about how the project is implemented, methodologies and things like that. And then if you have any questions, so that's my goal, you know, maybe few topics here and there we can add on depending upon our interest at the time. But this is what I'll try to cover in this course is introduction, and then changes in sales, changes in procurement, and changes in the planning. So what are the changes in general logistics modules? Okay, any questions? Okay, that's all for today then.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks. Bye. Good night.
This
From
conference will now be recorded.
so some
I will show you.
yeah.
Um,
Go ahead.
I will not show you how to create a purchase org or sales org and things like that because we don't have time to cover all that. But
Yeah.
I'll probably pick up some existing sales orgs, organizational units, and I'll try to. I'll create one material master, one customer master because there is a difference in the way how customers are created in HANA compared to in ECC. We have something called a business partners here compared to standard customers or vendors in ECC. So I'll create one business partner and we can use that business partner to run through the sales cycle and purchasing cycle. I'll show you one
Okay.
sales cycle and one purchasing cycle. And probably when you get an opportunity, you probably can explore more in details about that.
Yeah. So that's good, but in the back end, we may need some config changes specific to S4HANA that you are going to show, right?
They see there are few changes. I will concentrate on the changes. For example, if
Okay.
you're about rebate management, there is a difference in the way how the rebate management is designed now compared to in ECC. So I'll show you the configuration for that. For credit management, there is a future. I mean, wherever there are changes in terms of configuration perspective, I'll show you that configuration. But wherever there are no changes, then I'll probably not focus much on that.
Okay. Means since I am from MMWM area, just interested what may be the config changes also in that area also.
Okay. I mean, from purchasing, see, I can. I think out of three, two of you guys are more into MM and WM, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So yeah, we can give more focus on the procurement side. I can give you just overview about the sales side, but
Okay.
purchasing side, I think when we come to purchasing, I'll show you more in details about purchase. There is not much change in the way the configurations are done, but there is a change in the way how the transactions are being done in purchasing.
Okay, okay. No problem.
For example, how you convert your PRs to PO, how you
Yeah.
assign your vendors RFPs and process like that. So how those transactions are being done, there is a change, but from the configuration per se, not much. But apart from the fact that for the output management, there is a big change. So I'll show you. I mean, as I said, wherever there is a change in
Integration
the
kind of
process,
point. Okay.
I'll show you the changes.
Okay. No problem.
Wherever there are no changes or very, very minimal changes, that I think you can, the moment you look at the screen, if you can make it out, I'll probably not focus too much onto it. I may talk about it while we're discussing that particular thing, but
Okay. No problem. Yeah.
I mean,
Thanks.
you can always come back to me, once you get access to the system and start doing some things. If you have any questions or anything like that, you can come back, no problem.
Yeah, if you also show one of the Fiori scenario, then it will be common for any application, right? Like sales, HR, whatever, because
Yeah,
we should know it works. That's it.
yes. I mean, Fiori again is completely customizable. So it all depends on how you customize the app. So whatever the
Yeah.
standard app that we get out of the box, we'll show you that.
Okay, okay. No problem.
So, provided if I have, I think I just saw previously, I think some of the apps are working, and I mean, so
Okay.
so that's good.
Yeah, no problem.
So I
Thank
got
you.
somebody else joined. think Sam has joined us. So, so Naveen, can you check if Prasanna is joining us? Sam, can you hear us?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, we have someone joined, so I don't know who that guy is. So are you all able to see my screen that I'm sharing?
Yes, Reni.
Okay. So I think, do we have everyone? I think I have Sam. I don't know. There's a new caller that's joined just now. Okay, I think I'll get this started. Okay, I think I'll get this started. So yesterday we learned briefly about why we have to go for HANA. I know what are the changes in the global environment changes that are driving for companies to go into HANA. And then some details, some key aspects of HANA is what we learned yesterday. Today we'll try to learn some more details as to the evolution of HANA, and then what is the difference between OLAP and OLTP, and the traditional, what are the differences in HANA database versus compared to the traditional databases, and then what is that HANA is going to solve that, or what is the simplicity that HANA is going to offer compared to your traditional or complex ECC environments. And then we'll talk briefly about Fiori, and then we'll have some discussion about the different deployment options we have, and then what are the different methodologies. We'll talk about the activate methodology, or and then the different conversions that you may have. So that will give us a brief introduction about, that ends up the summary of what introduction about S4HANA. And then coming from tomorrow, we'll probably can get this more into the subject matter, into these details. But let's start today about evolution of S4HANA. You know, even though HANA
Srini, are you sharing anything? You're not seeing anything.
Yeah, I am, right?
I'm seeing white screen.
Yeah, I'm seeing white screen too. Yeah, seeing white screen. Earlier we saw your screen. Now it is white screen.
Now?
Yes, now you're able to see. Yeah.
Yeah, now we are able to.
Okay. So originally SAP started, with the first release of S4 SAP HANA was started in the year 1511. So that's when the first version of SAP HANA came in, and then every year they started to release new versions. So the first version is 1511, and then they've released one version in 1610, and then they've released in 1709, 1809, and then 1909. So this is how it looks. The first two digits of the version tells you what year it is released, and the next two digits will tell you what is the month that it is released. So 1909 is something released in October 2019. 1809 represents September 2019, September 2018, etc. And then for every year, there are few changes that are coming in. The first 1511 had a basic things like it still had the SAP NetWeaver platform, but then the core ECC was working on any database, and then in 1511 everything was moved over to HANA, and then some changes. So initially it all started with finance, and then slowly extended to the other modules like logistics, like sales and purchasing, etc. So SAP actually began rewriting it's some of the code. I think it's all in the finance module that where they think that the whole code had to be rewritten, because they were actually looking for some kind of database that will support for faster processing. But unfortunately, the current ECC, if you see the transactions, if you look at MSEG, BSEG, MKPF, those tables are very big. And anytime you try to retrieve data from those database tables, it takes a lot of time, because it's only the account number is the key, and it takes a lot of time from pulling the data. And it had to be written in that way because of the limitations that SAP was having with the traditional databases. And now they were trying to find a new database that will actually fulfill their requirement. But unfortunately, they were not able to get to any database. Every relational database that's available in the market, like Sybase or Oracle, they were having some kind of limitations, and SAP had to bow down to those limitations and write the complex logic that we have in ECC. But then slowly they had to design their own database, and then they had to rewrite the entire finance application, and then so that your application, your core logic is now supporting the hardware that it has. So the data model was redeveloped, and the application code was completely rewritten on this new simplified data model. So, and then it started with finance, and then slowly they have made changes into leading modules like sales or purchasing or procurement, things like that. And then slowly they started to enhance logics on there, not enhance, rewrite some of the applicational logics in there. So that's how the gradually SAP has evolved from 1511 up until 2019 now. Okay. So coming back to the different kinds of deployment options that we have for HANA. So we have basically three types of deployment options. One is your on-premise option, one is your cloud option, one is your hybrid option. I'll talk about those options in a couple of slides next. So it also has something called application service. 1 minute, let me see if I can minimize this screen. Okay, so it has basically application services, processing services, and integration services. So what are the things that are available in application services, right? Many applications can be built. I mean, the application services, like it's trying to integrate with external like web servers, JavaScripts, Fiori apps. All these are the applications that start using, and then it can seamlessly integrate with these, and then it also can handle different types of data. We'll talk about the OLTP and OLAP. So in ECC, traditionally we have something called OLAPs, and then OLTP. Those two are separated. That's the reason why when BW started, we used to have ECC on the transactional level, And then we used to have some tools that will extract the transactions from the database and then load those transactions into something called cubes in the BW extractor tools. And then based on the data that's loaded in the cubes, the reportings are written on the graphical presentation. So whatever the graphical presentation of the reporting that we have is called OLAP. That's called online analytical processing system. So that's when we can have more granular, graphical pictorial representation of the data, etc. And whatever the traditional ECC was called transaction processing, because that's where all the transactions are getting, that's where all the transactions are loaded. Your sales orders, purchase orders, invoices, etc. Everything are actually loaded on there. So that's called OLTP, where you have transaction processing, where you have analytical processing. So these two are two different entities in ECC. Now with HANA, with what will happen is it's trying to combine everything. So that's why we had data that's pulled over to the BW overnight. If you worked in an environment where it had BW systems, so we used to transfer the data over the night to the BW system, and then BW system used to consume the data, store it in the cubes, and then it's available for the reporting the following day. So the data that's available to the users, right, or to the managers, who is there, it's not a real-time data. It's probably a day's old data. And if there is any problem in the transformation, if there is any issues in the extraction and pulling, the reporting was incorrect. So we had to have when they're trying to pull the data into the cubes, they had to have write their own interpret the data in their own way to present the data. So that's not the real-time data that was presented, but it's the closest that we had at that time. Now with HANA, what will happen is because of the database that supports the RAM in-memory database, and the data is stored in memory, and so that we don't have to separately load the data into the extractor. So it's all OLTP and OLAP is combined into a single environment with HANA. So that's the biggest advantage that you can, and because of this, so whenever you go to your Fiori apps, you are able to pull down the analytical way in a much faster way. For example, if somebody goes into the Fiori, they were able to graphically see what is the volume of the open orders that's still untouched, or what is the volume of the orders. Today we have some reports to pull. I don't know if you're, for example, we have so many purchasing reports, right? Let's talk about some of the purchasing reports, like open vendor report, what is the volume of the vendors, or let's say how much, what is the purchasing volume that we are doing against the vendors, or for the sales transactions, let's say what are the what are the orders that are blocked for delivery, or what are the orders that are blocked for credit, and things like that. We used to have separate reports and all that in ECC. Now with this analytical processing, the moment you log into Fiori, a manager logs into Fiori, he can immediately see the pictorial representations of the data, like, okay, 42K worth of orders are pending in credit limit. So he can immediately go down to the credit department and say, hey, why are these orders still in pending? Or if he can immediately he can see that 60 million orders are in backlog, then he can call the planners and say, hey, why 60 million orders are on the backlog? That kind of informational data is readily available for the users when they log into Fiori, and that's because of the OLAP that's available in HANA, which is not available in ECC. So when we log into, let me show you. Let me see if I can. Are you able to see my screen now?
Yes.
Are you seeing HANA screen, or are you seeing PowerPoint still?
PowerPoint.
Okay. Let me see. Oh. Okay, so you are seeing my PowerPoint screen, my Fiori screen, right?
Yes.
Okay, so this is the OLAP information that I'm referring to. So there are 6.34 thousand orders that are left in there. So there are, there is an issue about 3.56 million orders, or 1.07 million thousand orders. So you can, these kind of pictorial representations are what we call as tiles here. So this is easily available because of the OLAP information that's available in HANA. Right. So now let's talk about some of the benefits that HANA gives you compared to the traditional databases. So, I mean, the traditional databases are designed to perform well on computers with limited RAMs. Because, for example, if your RAM is limited spacing, right? Then your traditional databases are very well supported that. So, and also the data is stored in hard disk drives, complex data model because of so many relational databases, redundancy of data, high data footprint because, as I said, we have to call multiple tables for the processing, and the traditional databases are more row-based data storage. And because of that, sometimes the transaction processing is slow because it had to update multiple tables. That's the reason why SAP had to create a lot of index tables. I don't know if you're aware of any of these index tables, right? So what happens is, for example, if you are trying to find out orders that are due for delivery, that are due for billing and things like that, for such quick informational purposes, SAP doesn't rely on the standard database tables like VBAK, VPUK, or EKKO, EKPO, things like that. It creates some index tables on its own in traditional ECC, and that every time you create a purchase order or you create a sales order, it updates those index tables. And whenever you run your reports, then it immediately pulls the data from these index tables. And that's the reason why every time you perform a transaction, it got to update both the database table and also the index table. And every time you perform a follow-on action, like if you create a purchase order, it got to update an index table. That's where it identifies it to be an open PO. And then every time you do a GR, then it got to take that PO out of that open table and then put it elsewhere. It's kind of index tables that it moves the data from one table to the another table. And similarly for the sales orders, every time you create a delivery, if you create an order, it will kind of keep it in the open order table. Every time you create a delivery for that order, it will try to remove the data from the open order table and put it in an open delivery table. And then if you create an invoice, it will try to pull out the data from the open delivery and put it into open billing table. So that's why when you're running bad jobs that to perform these transactions, it's able to effectively pull the data. But if these index tables were not there, then if I have to find out everything from the standard database tables, then it's going to take a lot of time. And because of this lot of index tables, the saving transaction at the amount of time it takes to save a particular transaction is big. And because of that, it slows down the process a lot. On a normal day when you are not waiting on something, that could be fine, you probably may not notice it. But if somebody is trying to place an order on the web, now you as a user go to amazon.com and try to place an order, right? Nowadays, earlier, as I said, when you place an order on an online portal like that, the other system like Amazon will collect that information from the user, create an order on their own database, and then send that order over to the backend companies or vendors as a purchase order. And then these backend vendors fulfill the order and then ship it back to the consumer. So the transaction is the same. The online order entry portal used to collect the information from the user and then send that information back to the suppliers. Supplier will submit the fulfill the shipment to the consumers and then communicate to the main application. The process didn't change, but now it all has to be fast, right? You can't wait for the status of an order the next day. So because of that, when you are making a transaction online, Amazon wants to communicate in real time with the suppliers. So when it tries to communicate with the real time with the suppliers, so first the application now try to visualize the situation. Now the application server like Amazon will have to collect that information, and then it has to internally process that, and then immediately call the backend vendors system, and then transfer the data there, and then the vendor system has to process that information and then send it back. So everything is here is real time. This is primarily to make sure that there is enough availability, there is the dates are communicated fast and effective way. If in the older mechanism, in ECC's mechanism, then the date communication is not very efficient, because it's an overnight transaction. So I create an order today, it goes to the supplier the next day, then supplier comes back and say, hey, I cannot fulfill this order by this day, and then we have to make an adjustment to the date. So this was happening before. Now because of the real-time data, everything got to be fast. I cannot have a transaction that's taking longer time, right? So because of that, your traditional ECC, you may experience systems that are slower in saving the transaction, because it got to update all these relational databases in the backend. I mean, as I said, the example that I referred to may not be applicable for every client, but whoever client it is applicable, right? Wherever there is a need for the speed, they may see it, And then coming back to the HANA, right? So it's designed for memory computing. The data is stored in RAM, not in the databases. And then because of that, it simplifies the data model. A lot of unwanted tables, redundant tables have been reduced. When I go to each application, when I talk about Metal Master, I'll show you what are the tables that it's reduced. When I go to the sales orders, I'll talk about what are the tables that it eventually reduced. I think I briefly touched upon it yesterday, that VBUK status tables like VBUK, VBUP are removed, and then the data is moved over to the standard tables. And because the redundant data has been reduced, there is less data footprint now. And then it's generally a column-based database, but if you want, you can use it like a row plus column database. I don't. Does anyone of you know what is the difference between a row-based? How does it effectively help between a row processing versus a column processing?
Yeah, it's kind of searching in Excel sheet, right?
Correct. So what will happen is, let's say you have 100 records in your Excel file, correct? So now one of the columns says date, and now you're trying to find an order that is created on a particular date. Now what will happen, SAP will try to search the whole database with that specific value, and then it tries to pull the data. Now for huge tables that has 100 columns, it is trying to get you 100 column information with just one particular key, searching every row. So it's going to take a lot of time. With column-based database, what happens is it instead of searching for 100 by 100 rows, it only tries to look for one particular column. It's like applying a filter on your Excel file. So you have your Excel file and you select a particular column, and then you put a filter for whatever the data you need. Everything else is automatically condensed, and you have to find. Rather than that's the column database. But if you have to use a row database, it's like select everything and then put a Control F and then try to find a particular value. It's the amount of time it takes to get you a result in the row database is considerably slower than the time it consumes in the column database. So I mean, when you're doing a transaction analytically, it may not really I don't know, for a functional analyst, it may not be of that relative importance. But when you start dealing with bigger volumes of the data, you will notice that the transaction are happening much faster in the column database compared to a row database. So that's one of the advantages with HANA. And as I can state below that, with the column-based database, column storage, so it's about 1800 times faster processing. So that's the reason why it will give you a much faster results in HANA. Any questions so far? Am I going too fast?
No.
Okay. Let me know if sometimes I tend to move a little bit if I'm involved. So let me know if I'm moving fast. Okay. Okay. So now we talked about that HANA actually simplified the applications, right? So what does it actually what did it actually simplify? So for example, if you look at the example here, right, in traditional ERP, when you create a logistics document like material document, when I say logistics document, it's mostly a material document, a material movement. When you do a goods receipt, when you do a goods issue, when you do a goods issue, so actually three transactions happen in the background. I mean, two transactions happen in the background, right? One is if you are moving the inventory outside of the company to inside of the company, there is a material document created, there is a financial document created, correct? So the material document will tell you where the good is moved, and the financial document will tell you what are the implications on the finance because of this movement. Let's say you bought a stock. So the financial document will tell you what vendors to credit and debit for and what accounts to credit and debit for. So in the back end of the financial document, again, there is a subset of another document called FI document and controlling document. So FI document, so every logistics document, it creates two different transactions. One FI document that will strictly deal with the general ledger entries, and the controlling document which deals with the cumulative indices. It doesn't specifically tell you about the general ledgers, but it tells you specifically about the cumulative numbers. So that's why you got to have a financial document that talks about the GLs, and then the controlling document that talks about the total indices. So you got to have two separate transactions. One is in the finance document and the controlling document, and then processing of. So you got to process your finance document, you got to process your controlling. So there is a lot of overlap between these documents. A lot of the data that's used between these documents is the same. So and because of that, the application, think about this way, the application code that is written inside the process to create, taking the same amount of the data, it's trying to create a financial document for a different purpose, it's trying to create a controlling document for a different purpose, and then you have a subsequent codes again to process your financial document and to process your controlling document. So there's massive amount of code that's written in the finance module. Now with SAP S4HANA, we now have only one document, and that document is called the universal general entry. So you don't no longer have an FI document, you no longer have a controlling document. You only have one document that's called universal general entry. So what it means is that there is only a single financial posting is made, and that too in one table. And these aggregations that will happen on the fly on the HANA views. So that single, I think it's ACDC accounting document table. So that table is the one that holds all the information about the financials and controlling. So the application code is much simplified in this process, right? Because earlier it had to deal with two different sets of the data, and now it deals with only one set of data, and one entry and one processing. So the application code is massively reduced, and because of that, the amount of the time it tries to process this transaction is big, and the same transaction is used for processing as far as the analytics as well. So these are the basic advantages or main advantages that you get out of HANA. And then let's talk about some of the complexities that we were having. Now let's take an example of I don't know how many of you are familiar with MRP process. MRP is a process where you transfer your requirements to production planning. Planning will take all these requirements and try to see whether they can know how to manage the raw materials and make the goods and get the dates available. So this is a process that will happen from the time you create your purchase orders or sales orders and the time the products are finished. So let's consider this example of MRP. Now, as you are seeing on this picture on the left hand side, that's basically the current complexity, right? This key business process is very complex. As you can see, there are multiple steps. First, you have to collect the data, and then you have to transfer the data to demand management, and then you have to see whether it's planned requirements and things like that. Then it has to update some LIS structures. So this whole process, it got to be updating the whole process. And anytime there is any delay in any of these processes today, the data is no longer real time anymore, right? So it's much more complex, and because it's complex because it got to update multiple tables to get you that synchronization of data between different modules, right? So that's the complexity. And because of all these complexities, right? So the real-time MRP is next to impossible, because by the time you start your transaction and by the time you come to analyze, so the data situation is always changed. I mean, you can quote some examples from your clients, but if you're working in a very fast-paced movement environment, right? So the time that you're collecting the data and the time you're processing it and the time you're presenting it, the situations have changed. So it's therefore very difficult to get your real-time MRP, and because you're not able to get to the real data, you're always operating and making decisions out of the data that's not real anymore, right? So as I said, it may not be that bottleneck in terms of most of the companies that are not really that fast. But if you're in a fast-paced moving environment where somebody like Amazon, your warehouse has to be literally super fast. So I mean, don't quote me wrong, I always take Amazon because that's where the speed matters. Like maybe a pharmaceutical industry, the speed matters in warehouses. That's why you see a lot of those warehouses have robotics, and that's a different animal altogether. We'll talk about it, but where speed is more required, this is not acceptable, right? So now if you come back to the new process, on the right hand side, on the right hand picture, so if you see here, there are the amount of steps that it got to go through in the new HANA is much simplified, and because of that, the data is more real-time process. And this is possible because of the raw power that's available in the HANA, and the dramatic reduction of the data and unwanted removal of unwanted data tables, redundant data tables, unwanted indexes, reducing of the processing logic, and making the application code faster. These are all the things that made it possible to have it. So now earlier MRP running is much painful job. So if you are on the customer service, right? Your MRP got to be finished, and then your rescheduling job had to be finished. Only then the customer service people are allowed to make changes to the order. Sometimes these jobs are so painful and long taking that I have experienced with some of my clients that they actually literally had to wait after coming to the office. They had to wait because some of these jobs took real long time, maybe 3-4 hours, and then the rest of the day we'll try to be spending about what's the one that's cost that long. I know that's one of the reasons why I don't know if you're aware, ATP server was also introduced to make this process much faster. So now with SAP S4HANA, you can plan very minute level out to the down to the lot sizes. So for example, if a customer order is taken, you can immediately determine the effect of that on all the subsequent. So for example, on a make to order environment, right? So this MRP is reflected to the orders on a make to order environment. So your make to order environment is where the customer gives you an order of his choice based on the options that you provide to him, and then based on the choices that are chosen on the order, your MRP has to explode, and then your components have to be exploded. So there's a master bill of master bill of materials, and then the bill of materials. So your production order has the material, and then when the MRP runs, the bomb explodes, and then when the bomb explodes, it identifies all the components, and then it looks at the availability of each component. So it has to roll back the date back onto the order. Only then we will be able to handle it. And because of these MRP discrepancies before, right? So there's always these kind of environments that we never have a consistent date. So that's why companies always used to take a safer approach and say any make to order, will try to give it to you in 3 weeks. But in reality, we don't need 3 weeks for making it, but we just push it that way because we know our MRPs are not reliable and we wanted to take a safer approach. So with HANA and the simplifications on this MRP, that makes this real-time decisions much faster, and then the customer service teams will be able to give you the dates much faster than before. So which will help you in streamlining your order processing and able to get you more revenue and more orders for that. Okay, so any questions so far?
No.
Okay, so now let's talk about some of the deployment options that we have. So when your company decides to go with HANA, right? So you have 3 possible options. I think somebody was asking me about this yesterday. So one is on-premise, one is cloud, and then one is we have a hybrid model, right? So what is the difference between an on-premise and cloud? So on-premise is something like how you have your ECC today. Like you have your hardware is installed on-site, and then you have licenses provided to you independently. And because of that, you have complete control on your update. So it's fully customizable, like how you do today. So today's environments are kind of ECC is completely like on-premise. So SAP gives you a sandbox and some licenses to you, and then you are free to use the system like way you want to. You can customize it the way you want to. You can use it the way you want to. The only difference being earlier they had a choice to pick and choose their databases, but now you don't have that choice. It all comes with a HANA database. But otherwise you have a lot of fully customizable, a lot of ABAP code transactions, Z transactions. You can write a lot of user exits, baddies, enhancements. You can do whatever you want to on the on-premise editions. So that's why it comes with a complete and comprehensive functionalities, and the entire application and infrastructure are completely owned and managed by the customer. And then it comes with an yearly update like 1510, 1511, 1610, 1709, 1809, 1909, etc. It comes with an yearly update, and then you are not forced to use those updates. So for example, it will come, for example, if you have implemented 1709, 1909 will have more updates, but you're not forced to get that updates. So it's completely left to the customer to choose when he wants to update it to 1909, or does he wants to stick on to 1709, things like that. But with cloud, you don't have that choice, right? For example, cloud is something like you are logging into somebody's website, right? And then if that company decides to update their website, so you are kind of forced to adapt to that new methodology as well. So it gives you a quarterly updates, unlike in on-premise it's an yearly update, but on cloud it gives you quarterly updates. And your cloud it could be a public cloud and it could be a private cloud as well. So public cloud is where the cloud space is actually utilized by 2-3 different companies, but you have to say that the space is utilized but not the data. The data is still independent to each customer, but the space is or the infrastructure is actually shared by multiple customers. Private cloud is where the whole space is completely utilized by the customer by neither the space nor the data is actually shared with anybody. So if you're using a public cloud, then your applications are shared, but the customers, and as I said, the applications are shared, but the data remains independent. So for example, if you're trying to create a sales order, you are not given an option to modify the screens of a sales order. So if there is an app to create an order, you can only choose that app to create an order, but you don't pick and choose, okay, I didn't like this button and I want to change this, or I want to rename this, or I want to add more buttons, or I want to add more apps. You cannot pick and choose such options on the public cloud. So it's the same sales order app or the same purchase order app, purchase order creation app that's actually used by company A and company B. But the data is independent to each other, but it's only that the application is shared. But in a private cloud, you don't have the full-fledged flexibilities like you have an on-premise, but you can actually make some adjustments because the application that you are using is strictly for the independent client. So you can make some modifications. So some areas can be, some changes are encouraged and incorporated, but not a whole lot like in-premise. You have some more freeway in terms of making changes compared to public cloud, but nowhere near to what you have on premise. And the other application and the other model is we have is a hybrid model where it's a mix and match of both. You can say that, okay, I may want to have ECC core component as on premise, and any add-on functionalities like Ariba, Conquer, or Field Class, or Hybris, these are things I want to have it on cloud. So that's completely possible, right? On premise is where your core functionality resides in, like you're making, you're selling, you're buying, your finances, everything are into that core module. You may choose to have, okay, I want to have a core on premise for my core ECC components, which is called enterprise management in HANA. But for any add-on modules, you can choose to have a cloud versions. So that's completely possible. So these clouds have, as I said before, they will, on-premise comes with an yearly edition. On-premise comes with an yearly edition where the first 2 digits are with year and the last 2 digits with the month name. And then the cloud versions actually come with the quarterly updates. And then the clients or the customers are forced to adapt to those new updates that are coming in. And with on-premise, you have new updates as part as a part of support pack services that we still. Sorry about that. What I was talking about, the support pack services, right? So today when you go to EHP, when for ECC we have ECC, EHP4, EHP7. We don't do it like when they are coming. So when they're coming, we evaluate when we want to apply it, and if there's any such functionality in EHP7 that we are missing today, then we may want to go for it. So those kind of updates are coming in every quarter, but you're not forced to with on-premise options. Any questions on this? Okay, so once you have an on-premise, once you've understood about what are the different options that we have on-premise versus cloud, and the next thing that you may want to know is, how do I move into HANA now? Now let's say, what are the different ways that I can go into HANA? So there are basically 3 different ways that you can go into HANA, right? So one is called the system landscape, and the second one is called the landscape transformation, and the third one is called new implementation. So what is the difference between system conversion and landscape transformation? Just give me a minute. Okay, so the system conversion is basically a complete upgradation of your system. Let's say you're running on an ECP or an ECC 5, ECC 4, or not 4. EHP is 4, EHP 7 in 6. And then now that you want to, okay, so now you decide that I want to go from ECC to on-premise, right? So you are completely migrating your ECC environment into your HANA environment. And then you have something called landscape transformation. So what is a landscape transformation? This is particularly a value option if your company is a global company, and then or it operates in multi regions like North America, Europe, EMEA, Middle East countries, African countries, Asia Pacific countries, etc. And now your company buys a sister concern company in EMEA, and now there are two ways, right? So you're running on ECC, and your sister concern company is running on a different environment. Now you have two options: either merge that company into your environment, or anyway you are also thinking going to HANA. So let's try to do that company into HANA first, and then we will try to have a global design and roll out everybody into that. So this is called landscape. So you pick and choose a regional specific, and then you go to HANA by region. So first you apply to North America, and then you have a global design, and then try to roll out every other region into this model. So this is called what we call as a landscape transformation. And for these landscape transformations, you can have the options. Either you may want to go for an on-premise, or you may want to go for a cloud. But for system conversion, it's completely on-premise. So your ECC is on-premise, so you are migrating from ECC to HANA, which is also an on-premise version. And then you also have something called a new implementation. So new implementation is where your company is currently running on a legacy system, and then you are wanting to migrate to a new bland SAP S4HANA, which is often referred as a greenfield implementation, where every process is new. So here, this is where we try to implement some standardization, or bring some standardization into processes and procedures. So you take the best practices and try to bring the client's business methodologies into these best practices, and then employ those best practices into the system. And then, of course, now there are a few areas where the customers may come into agreement with these best practices, and then there are a lot of areas where they may want to have their own customized way of their business process. So that's when you make some adjustments to it. But if you are going with an on-cloud, then you're kind of forced to come into best practice method, because you don't have much choice for the customization. But if you're going for an on-premise edition, then yes, you may have some options to make some adjustments. So basically, you have three types of conversions. One is a system conversion, which is a brand new, which is completely, this I would say, a technical upgrade, because your processes are not changing much, and it's as an end user, I may not see a major difference, but technically you're migrating from, let's say you're migrating from EHP 4 to EHP 7. Does the user feel any difference? No, right? So similarly, system conversion. So they may see few things, but not a lot. But for landscape transformations, so it's like a phased approach of bringing in, and then you have a brand new implementation. And then, so there are some, now when you are doing a system, now you are running on ECC. So now you may want to go to HANA. So there are two options with you based on what we discussed before, right? Now you're running on an ERP system, all right? That the ERP could be SAP, or it could be a legacy system, non-SAP system, right? So and then you're going to a HANA. Then you have two options. One is you're doing a system conversion. System conversion is you're moving the trash from one bag to the other bag. So new implementation is where you're trying to filter down your unwanted stuff, and then take only the fresh stuff into the new ones. So whether you want to go for a new implementation, or whether you want to go for a system conversion, there is a standard checklist that you may want to answer. So if your answer is, depending upon your answer is yes and no, you choose a approach for your company. right? So do you want to keep your enhancements? If it is yes, then go for a system conversion. Then say, hey, no, my enhancements, my system, I have a very bad custom code written, so I may want to reconsider it. So then it's a new code. Or do you want, does your system fulfill all your conversion requirements? So as I said, when we talk about the readiness check, we will do a conversion prerequisite check as well. So as a part of the prerequisites, if the system is able to completely do it, then you're allowed for the system conversion. If not, then you're forced to go with the new. So this is some kind of questionnaire that is available in there as a part of a readiness check that comes in, and then depending upon the answers that you have here, you make a decision whether should I go for a new implementation or should I go for system conversion. I mean, basically the readiness check is basically a kind of tool that will assist the companies in able to make a better decision whether they may want to go for one way or the other. And what are the things that are whenever you're migrating or considering a transition, right? So there are few things that you may want to consider. So first thing is your master data for customers, vendors, and employees. So as I said, master data is changing in HANA. So in SAP ECC, you had your customers and you had your vendors, and your customers or vendors are no longer working in HANA. They are moving into what we call as a business partner. So you have only one business partner, and that business partner can either be used as a customer or a vendor depending upon on their role. So that's why we create one business partner and assign roles to that business partner. So if that business that vendor acts as a customer and vendor, you assign two different roles. If not, you assign only one role. So this way we have one unique customer number that's shared across between multiple systems. And then, for example, if you are using some transactions become obsolete in HANA, like your MB01, MB1A, MB1C, those transactions become obsolete in HANA. If you are using your programs where a lot of custom codes are written to support this, or your Z transactions are supporting this, then you may want to consider that. So there are a few things. Particularly the master data synchronization follows a lot of stricter rules in HANA. So if your company is able to make to that adjustments, that's one of the consideration or a considering factor that you may want to see whether, and then make a decision whether go for that or not. So similarly, other interfaces and extractors. So you may want to consider those and then make a decision whether what is that you want to approach. And then, as I said before, there is a readiness check that's available. So the readiness check is performed as per the, if you go through the, I don't know if you have, I'll give you the readiness check. I'll give you a PDF copy of the sources note. So if you're free, you can read that in detail. So that will give you a very good elaboration and step-by-step procedures how to run this readiness check. So based on the instructions that are run in that readiness check, it will tell you whether your system is ready, or you may want to clean your system much more and then come back for the upgradation. So yesterday I think somebody was asking me a question, your custom code thing, right? I don't know who it is. Sam, maybe you?
Yes, Srini, yes, I asked.
Okay. So your readiness check is where, if you see here, the custom code preparation, right? So this is where we check whether your custom code is technically be converted into HANA. And then if it is yes, then fine. If it is no, then then you may have to filter down and then come back and evaluate whether do we need this application, or do we want to rewrite this whole application in the new environment. So that's the check or the decision that the companies should make at the time of this preparation phase. So is your question answered?
Yes.
Okay. So, and then when you're going into the preparation, right? So these are some of the steps that you may want to run. So you have to run the maintenance planner, and this is a link that will give you whether that will does some kind of preliminary check, and then tells you whether your system is readily or not. And as I said, there are a lot of such tools, so make whether the companies just have to make a decision. So have to use all these tools to make a decision whether which way they want to go. But there are a lot of tools that will help them drive this decision. So run the readiness check. So there is a lot of information, and these links have a lot more detailed, very detailed information and step-by-step process. So when you are in our class, we probably cannot go through each one of that point, but if you're free, you can take a look at those links. Standard SAP material, and even at the client location, the customers will read through each one of these and then make a decision as to how to and then your custom code ABAP test cockpit, what we call as custom code with ABAP test cockpit, and whether it's ready for HANA or not is actually there's a very detailed document here, Sam. So if you want interested, since you're interested in the custom code check, you may want to go through this here.
And the migration cockpit, they call that migration cockpit, right? Is it the same thing that you just said?
Yeah, it's a not a migration cockpit, but what we call as a ABAP test cockpit for a custom code checkness.
Okay, so migration cockpit is another thing, is it? Data migration. See, your transaction data and your master data.
Yeah, that's different thing.
To move from ECC to HANA, they call that migration cockpit, or
yes.
ABAP?
So that comes as a part of this readiness check.
Okay, readiness check. Okay.
That comes as a part of the readiness check.
Gotcha.
So
Okay.
in ECC we have SAP methodology, right? So and then in HANA we have activate methodology. So let me show you the. Okay, so this is the path for the activate methodology. So we have a discover phase, prepare phase, explore, realize, and deploy. In ECC we used to have ASAP methodology, and then here we have activate methodology. So I mean, essentially the jobs that are done are same, but just some new naming conventions. And then, so what do you do in the discover phase? So in the discover phase, you probably still trying to see whether is HANA good for you or not. So you're evaluating multiple vendors and see which one is good, and then you take some trial options and you take asins to demos, and then once you've made a decision, then you probably are into the preparation phase. So, and then in the preparation phase, that's when all those readiness checks are run and things. And then in the explore phase, that's when we start to blueprint. One in the explore phase is where we've made a decision to go with the on-premise edition and with a brand new greenfield. So a preparation phase is where you run all your tools, your readiness check tools, to help you make a decision which way are you going. Are you going for a greenfield implementation? Are you going for a brownfield implementation? Are you going for a cloud? Are you going for an on-premise? Depending upon your current system and depending upon how your current system reacts to the readiness check, so you make a decision that I want to go with a particular, let's say, on-premise system conversion or on-premise a new implementation. And then in the explore phase, you take what we call as a blueprinting phase in SAP methodology, where you evaluate process by process and see which process fits into the best practice, which process doesn't fit into the best practice, and then if some changes are required, what are the changes? And as I said, if I go into the cloud and if your process doesn't fit into the cloud, so what do you do? And then come into the realization, you make those corresponding changes, and then eventually you deploy. So this is what we call as a activate methodology. So with that, I mean, same like with SAP methodology, even with activate methodology, you start with your best practices and then try to make sure that the client's business process are fitting in these best practices. And then if there are some changes need to be made outside of that, then you try to see whether you prioritize whether should they be done now or should they be done post deployment, post go live, or things like that. So as a company, right, you all are working, so the companies have to make a decision sometimes to make sure that you implement, you take the services of an implementing partner only where they are required. Some things that you are comfortable doing it on your own, you try to push it as a part of your post go live changes, so that you make changes after the implementation partner leaves. And then when the implementation partner is around, they'll try to make sure, they'll try to offer you best practices and try to convince the customer to implement their business process into the best practices, and then provide you a solution for your processes, and then you try to evaluate, and then you build it, right? So this is the Activate methodology. So what are the advantages or disadvantages of this Activate methodology is that and also with HANA, the biggest advantage that we have is because of this Activate methodology, right? It is kind of now what we call a sprint model, unlike before where you have a big bang approach, where you take the requirements for the whole process, you run the blueprinting phase for about 6 months, and then you gather your requirements, you do your realization for 6 months, you build a process, take testing for another 6 months, and then come back, and then by the time you fix all your bug fixes and things here, and by the time you move, so it's a long process, right? So now, because as I said, because of the speed environment, we don't have time. So now we evaluate that steps I discussed before as each sprint. We realize that, okay, for this sprint we are doing these 10 activities, and then we start to work on it, we develop those sprints, we test those sprints, and then deliver those sprints, and then come back, and then any new requirement that comes in is added to the sprint. So at the time of the full-fledged implementation, we'll say that okay, 6 sprints or 7 sprints, and depending upon that, the solutions are delivered. So this way, at least people are always constantly engaged, and they know what is the product can do or cannot do. So most of the times in the ECC implementation, the disadvantage is that you take 6 months of your own speed time for the blueprinting, and then in the blueprinting phase, not everybody in the company are involved, right? So there are only selective people, and there is always a big rumors going around in the company saying that, hey, we are going to SAP, and that kind of brings a lot of questions to the sales staff that, hey, we're moving into a new environment, new softwares. So would there be a job for me? Would there not be a job for me? There's a lot of insecurity, and because of this insecurity, many things can happen. And with this new approaches, right? So people get involved in much earlier stages, so they get to know the hands-on. So by the time the implementations are done, you don't have to spend a lot of time on a lot of trainings and things like that. So people are aware of what's coming in, they're fully into testing it, so they understand the system well. So by the time you start your sprint 1, and by the time you start your sprint 4 or 5, you are into it. Generally the analysts or business analysts are into it. They know what it can and what it cannot do, and depending on that, they can really reprioritize their requirements and say, hey, this is some things that we want to do it now, or this is something that can be done later, things like that. So you reprioritize your stuff, and so that only priority ones go in, and then the lesser priority ones can be brought in at a later point of time. So that's the advantage that we get through the Activate methodology. And then this is again a roadmap that will help you drive what are the different steps that are actually done in individual phases, like in a discover phase, prepare phase, explore phase. Again, this link here that will give you a very, very detailed step-by-step information about what is done at each step. Okay, the last but not the least, I'm a little over today, but I'll try to finish the Fiori so that we are done with the introduction today. Is that okay with you all?
Yeah.
Okay, we are not too far. So so Fiori, you all must have heard about a lot of things about Fiori, what it can do. So Fiori is nothing but a front-end tool, So this is what you're seeing as a Fiori, right? So the Fiori is nothing but a front-end tool that will help people to instead of going into, earlier we used to go into GUI to create an orders, right? So now we go into Fiori. You know, the advantages and disadvantages of Fiori is that it is completely a role-based approach. Unlike SAP is more a transaction-based approach. So, for example, there is only a single transaction to create a purchase order. There is a single transaction to create a sales order. So, but then there are different order types, and the amount of the data that we use within the transaction is different. So, a lot of times, people processing the credit memos are confused because of the so much of data that they're presented with on the screen. And similarly, same thing happens with the purchase order as well. So your regular purchase order may want more information, but your service PO, free of charge POs may want less information. So, and then somebody's are authorized to create service POs, somebody's are authorized to create stock POs, somebody's are authorized to create stock transfer POs. So depending upon what their role is, you can design apps in such a way that only those transactions appear for them and not everything. So if I'm authorized to create only stock transport orders and purchase orders, so when I open Fiori with my thing, I only have access to those transactions. Earlier we used to control these through a lot of security enhancements. If you remember, you know, ME21N is a single transaction code, but if somebody is not allowed to create a stock transfer, we try to control them by the doc type, right?
Yeah, correct.
So similarly, somebody who processes only credit memos, they are not allowed to create regular sales orders. So we control it to security through doc types. So a lot of customizations are done in the security level as well to prevent such unauthorized use of the data within the document. Because in ECC, those transactions are more transaction specific, not role specific. But in Fiori, you are more into role specific. So what we call them as organized tiles that you're seeing here. Again, this Fiori is not just a technology that's used today. Everywhere today, this kind of tile technology is kind of used everywhere. For example, if you log into Bank of America account here, right, or your banking accounts, so the moment you log in, it will try to give you tiles that will tell you, okay, this is your credit card outstanding balance, this is your credit score, this is the volume of the transactions that you did, so this is the categories of spending that you are done, right? So you are seeing such small tiles in your online banking accounts that will collect all the information, present the data there. So Fiori is also such tool where you can where the data is collected and presented in terms of tiles the data is collected in tiles and presented. So it's more process related, role job related, and not a transaction specific or role based authorizations. So yeah, as I discussed before, so you earlier multiple people used to log into the same transaction. On sometimes it is controlled through security and sometimes it is not controlled. But with Fiori, what will happen is you have role specific. So somebody who is not allowed to do a particular thing, so that app or feature cannot be given to them, right? So and also in your GUI, sometimes you may have to do multiple transactions. For example, if you were to create a dropship PO, right? You have to create a sales order. You have to create a purchase. I mean, after the dropship, purchase rigs are created. So you have to assign a vendor to the purchase rig, and then once the vendors are assigned to the purchase rig, you have to convert that purchase rig into a PO, right? So there are multi-step processes here. But with Fiori role-based apps, right, sometimes these things can be done straight away with one click. For example, you create your order, but assignment of the vendor, conversions of and finding the appropriate vendor, assignment of vendors to the particular requisition, and then converting that requisition into a purchase order can all be done by one click instead of two separate transactions. So you got to go to ME57 to assign a vendor, and then you got to go to ME59 to convert that assigned vendor assigned purchase rig into a purchase order, right?
Yep.
So with Fiori, these two transactions can be clubbed, and with the fewer clicks you can perform the whole transactions end to end. Sometimes it's a lot more easier, and then you can add more validations to that and to make your process much simpler. But for a end user, it makes a lot more easier to straight away and present the data in such a way that, okay, this is my order where there is not converted into a PO, and then I can assign a vendor and I can convert that and assign a vendor and save it, and behind the screen it automatically does the two-step process for you and then gives you a purchase order number directly. So because of that, how much of time, for example, at least it takes a minute to open a transaction and then find a appropriate PO and then open the PO, assigning the vendor, saving the transaction, going back to your next transaction, and then performing the same thing again. So it takes at least 2 to 3 minutes to perform one particular transaction, right? Converting a sales order, converting a purchase order, converting a sales order to a purchase order. But with apps, the same job can be done in probably 30-45 seconds. So you're saving at least a minute for one user. So think about and extrapolate this information for the rest of the activities. So this is a brief pictorial representation of how much time a particular user can actually save with the Fiori. It's proven that it's probably a 50% reduction in time for somebody who's processing the orders. So that concludes our Fiori changes. So that concludes our introduction about HANA, why it is required, what are the different implementation methodologies we have, approaches we have, and we talked briefly about Fiori. So maybe from tomorrow we'll talk a little more about the subject, but this concludes our introduction about why SAP HANA. Any questions?
No.
Yeah, I think if you have no questions, I think we'll stop for the day today. Okay.
Thank you, Srini.
Thank you.
Right.